Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 4 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Councilmember Griswold? Here. Councilmember Lum? Here. Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman? Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Present.
Councilmember Remlawi?
Here.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Remlawi. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. We have communications today from our city administrator.
Yes, Mayor. There are several items of communication attached to the agenda. I'll go through a couple of those quickly. The first is an update on the status of the tree line trail. That information is provided in part as staff will ask council to consider the adoption of a cooperative agreement with the Tree Line Trail Conservancy at the next council meeting. There is a response to council resolution that providing an update on the council directed review of the ADU ordinance amendments. And there's also a memo addressing the need to conduct appraisals for leases on public lands. It's required under city code. It does provide for the city administrator to recommend some exceptions to council. It's not an approval requirement, but in the event that there are council members who may have concerns about any particular one of the locations specified in the memo, please let me know, because I would want to address those before any lease came up for renewal. There's also a response to Council Resolution 18-497 that addresses crosswalk improvements. I know there are a lot of people here in the audience this evening sporting the yellow A2 Safe Transport t-shirt, and I thought I'd take a minute to go through some of the improvements that we've made over the last couple of years and talk a little bit what's in the current year and then some budgeting items. It may take a little longer than I'm used to talking, but I think with respect and providing due respect to people who came out this evening, I'd like to go through it. Over the last 3 years, there have been crosswalk put in at 20 new locations. There have been RRFBs installed at 19 new locations, pedestrian islands at 7 new locations, gateway treatments at 44 new locations. We've updated pavement markings at 174 locations, put in bump outs at 14 new locations, improved the lighting at 24 new locations, updated signage at 114 locations, put in 5 new school speed zones, and we've put school safety improvements totally at 101 locations. The following are approved for this year. There are crosswalks at 13 new locations, rectangular rapid flashing beacons at 9 new locations, a couple new gateway locations, updated pavement markings at 8 locations, bump outs at 14 new locations, and 41 new lighting locations. We'll put signage at 3 locations, improved pedestrian signal improvements at 2 locations, a new school speed zone, and then some school safety improvements at 4 other locations. And there are improvements at 8 other locations for which the treatment is being considered but hasn't yet been finalized. We recently submitted to council the crosswalk design guidelines on January 15th. With the help of our council policy agenda committee, staff will work with the council and with state DOT and our elected representatives to look for a statewide crosswalk standard that will help ensure safety, because safety is enhanced when people know what to expect and there's consistency. We'll continue to work with all of our local partners, including the University of Michigan, the Ann Arbor Public Schools, MDOT, the Washtenaw Road Commission, the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority, the city's Transportation Commission, the DDA, and the many community-based organizations that are working towards improved safety and quality of life. We'll continue messaging through the A2 Be Safe program. We are programming additional staff resources to further promote pedestrian safety programs, including providing focus on the city's commitment to a Vision Zero approach. But pedestrian and bicycle facility improvements will continue to be a significant component of our capital improvement projects. We'll provide additional enforcement at locations where changes to pedestrian crossings are being implemented, at least until people become used to the new traffic patterns. We'll continue to improve crosswalk lighting, focusing on both on the installation of new illumination and the repair, maintenance, and replacing of existing assets. We are working to add new request categories to A2 Fix-It, including the creation of a crosswalk category so users can more easily file high-demand requests. I would like to thank Officer Travis Keller for being with us this evening from AAPD. And as a little bit of a transition, on February 1st, we opened up sign-in for spring and summer day camps. And with the new software, registrations went up 40% in the first 8 hours. Revenues received went up 81%. And between midnight and 12:20 a.m., there's almost $27,000 in registration. So it's a great demonstration of using technology to enhance our residents' experience. With that, and with your permission, I'd like to introduce the Assistant City Administrator, John Fournier, so that there is an introduction item for him to present.
Yes, this is for the proclamation commending the life-saving actions of city employees, USAA hockey referee, and the Ann Arbor Recreational Hockey League players. So, come on up, everybody. All right. Let's come around this way. Your back is to the audience, but you're facing the millions at home. We all expect, we all are thankful for, and consistently grateful for, and honored by the service that we receive from our first responders. As was shown multiple times by all the city first responders, as well as the other municipalities and jurisdictions first responders over the course of this past cold spell. They're there. They're on the. When we stay home, they stay on the job, and they're there for us every day, 24/7. And we saw that with tragic results for residents. And heart-wrenching results too for our injured firefighter over this course of this past weekend. And while we consistently recollect that and know that to be true and expect it of them, we do not always know and understand that other members of the Ann Arbor family are there too and trained to provide able and ready and life-saving assistance for us when we need it. And I'd like to read a proclamation that describes such an event today and express my own and the city's gratitude for it. So this is a proclamation honoring Ann Arbor City employees, Kelsey LaHaye, Kaya Auer, Gabby Peck, Bill Meeks, and Josh Landefeld, USAA hockey referee Paul Krolik, and Ann Arbor Recreational Hockey League players Matt Kennison, David Goyer, and Robert Garcia. Whereas the City of Ann Arbor hosts myriad recreational sports leagues at our various facilities, which are enjoyed by residents and non-residents alike on a daily basis. And whereas the safe enjoyment of our public spaces is a top priority for our dedicated park staff who engage in basic emergency medical training so that they may provide support to patrons in need should events call for it. And whereas on Saturday, January 12, 2019, Eddie Kulski was playing in one of the city's recreational hockey leagues and experienced a medical emergency that rendered him unconscious during gameplay. And whereas City of Ann Arbor employees, Kelsey LaHaye, Kyla Auer, Gabby Peck, as well as USAA hockey referee Paul Krolik,
were able to provide emergency medical attention to Mr. Kulski, while their efforts were joined by Recreational Hockey League players Matt Kennison, David Goyer, and Robert Garcia, supported too by Josh Landefeld and Bill Meeks. And whereas the quick decision-making actions taken by this group of individuals may have saved the life of Mr. Kulski, whereas their actions are not only a testament to the character of the Ann Arbor community, but to the high quality of training and dedication demonstrated by our Parks and Recreation staff on a regular basis. Now, therefore, I, Christopher Taylor, Mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, do hereby commend City of Ann Arbor employees Kelsey LaHaye, Kyla Auer, Gabby Peck, Bill Meeks, and Josh Landefeld, USAA hockey referee Paul Krolik, and Ann Arbor Recreational League players Matt Kennison, David Goyer, and Robert Garcia for their quick intervention and decisive actions that helped save the life of Mr. Eddie Kulski on Saturday, January 12, 2019. Thank you. It's customary for people. Mr. Kulski, please come. Welcome. Good. Thank you. It's customary for someone to say something. If someone wants to say something, if you want to just get your proclamation and move along, that's okay too. All right. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
While the mayor is making his way back over, I'd like to commend Mr. Fournier for bringing this to our attention. I think it reminds us here in Ann Arbor, you don't always have to look very far to find a hero.
We now come to public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. Speakers are not authorized to grant their reserve time to an alternate speaker. Accommodations can be made for persons needing assistance, and if you require it, we would be delighted to provide it to you. Finally, as a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. Our first speaker today is Diane Gianola.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Diane Gianola, and I live at 3252 Alpine Drive. I'm here to speak in regards to CA18, the hiring of Arcadis of Michigan to review the water rate restructuring that was implemented last summer. I'm asking for one of the alternatives that allows for a reversal to the old water rate structure to be removed from the resolution and the scope of work in the contract. This is not an acceptable outcome that should be considered in the consultant's final report. The new restructured billing system, although not perfect, is much more equitable for multifamily water users, specifically condo owners. The water rate restructuring was an eye-opener for those of us who never knew we were subsidizing single-family homeowners. Previously, condo owners were paying 1.5 times to 2.5 times for their water than single-family homeowners. The new rate restructuring brings our water rate down 44% from our previous rate, allowing multifamily residents to have a much more equitable rate. It is fine to tweak, revamp, or restructure the new system going forward, but it is not acceptable to go back to the old rate structure where multifamily users were paying more. I want to remind you that multifamily users are not just renters, but include tax-paying condo owners. You need to improve on the progress that was made with the more equitable rates, not go backwards. Going backwards might seem the easiest route for some of you, but I assure you it is not. Consultants are asked to look at specific issues with parameters around what they are allowed to consider. I do not want their charge to include a reversal based on the viewpoint of single-family residential customers without realizing that multifamily customers would be greatly harmed by the reversal. This was an inequity that was not recognized previously by council and the public, but is now known since we've had the water rate restructuring. Your current resolution does not even mention this. Allowing a complete reversal as an option for the consultant does not consider the fact that it could be overlooked or ignored. The question you ask the consultant to answer about what they should consider and review will dictate the outcome. Including this option for a full reversal in the charges to the consultant says that it is acceptable to knowingly have multifamily residents pay more for their water. It is not acceptable at this point. It is obvious that some on this council want a full reversal to the old rates, regardless of the facts. My hope is that others will only potentially move forward with tweaking and improving the restructuring plan and not reversing it altogether. Going backwards inflicts a known financial burden on condo owners, where we condo owners subsidize single-family homeowners. It would be nice if council actually held a discussion in regards to this. I ask that you remove the language from the resolution that specifies a reversal to the old rate system as an alternative outcome of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Thomas Giordano.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Thomas Giordano. I live at 2032 Sire Church Court, Ann Arbor. I'm a professor of pathology and internal medicine at Michigan Medicine. My area of clinical expertise is endocrine pathology, including pathology of the thyroid gland. My area of research expertise is cancer genetics and genomics, with emphasis on cancers of the thyroid and adrenal glands. I was fortunate to serve as the disease co-chair of 2 large cancer genome projects of the National Cancer Institute's program called the Cancer Genome Atlas. I am also a member of the Board of Directors of the American Thyroid Association, abbreviated ATA. I am here tonight at the request of the ATA to support the resolution before the council tonight entitled "A Resolution to Strengthen Nuclear Emergency Planning for the Population of the City of Ann Arbor, Michigan," Agenda Item B2D, and Ordinance 19-0192. The ATA supports this resolution. The ATA, a leading public health organization dedicated to the prevention and population-level risk reduction of thyroid disease, has called for the international harmonization of best practice standards for direct predistribution and stockpiling of non-prescription potassium iodide, Ki, around nuclear power plants. The major reasons for the Ki predistribution of Ki to be consumed in the event of a nuclear emergency include the following. Ki effectively reduces thyroidal exposure to I-131 isotope. To be effective, Ki must be taken within a few hours of I-131 exposure. If evacuation, sheltering in place, and avoidance of contaminated food are not possible, Ki ingestion is effective in reducing thyroidal exposure to 131 and associated with very few possible side effects. The primary purpose of Ki predistribution is to reduce I-131 exposure to the thyroid from inhalation. Even if radiation exposure thresholds are not exceeded and public health officials do not recommend it, the demand for Ki will be high following a nuclear emergency. The ATA supports the following recommendations. The Ki use should be part of an emergency plan that includes evacuation, sheltering, and avoidance of contaminated food, milk, and water ingestion in the event of a nuclear emergency. The highest priority for Ki use and all other emergency measures should be given to babies, children under 18 years of age, and pregnant women. Within a minimum of 10 miles of an actively operating nuclear power plant, Ki should be pre-distributed to individual household. Emergency reception areas immediately outside of this radius should also be equipped with Ki stockpiles. This should be a required rather than an optional measure. For individual households within 50 miles of an operating nuclear power plant, Ki should be stockpiled in local public facilities such as schools, hospitals, clinics, post offices, pharmacies, and police and fire stations for distribution upon notification by local health officials. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and for your attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Schoenberger.
Hello, Mayor Taylor and council members, city staff, and members of the public. My name is David Schoenberger. I'm an Ann Arbor resident, and I'm here today to register my support for the city's emergency planning resolution on today's agenda, item number DB2, which was just referenced, co-sponsored by council members Bannister and Smith, approved by the City Environmental Commission, and reviewed by city staff and attorneys. To be clear, I am one of the co-authors who collaborated to bring forth this resolution for the benefit of the Ann Arbor community, consistent with advancing and implementing the city's sustainability goals. The core principle of this resolution is that Michiganders deserve equal protection compared to our neighbors in Canada for a public health risk which comes from a point source here in Michigan. Everyone here knows that the current federal government administration in Washington, D.C. is fully engaged in pursuing a systematic deregulatory agenda. As a result, this municipal resolution has recently taken on new significance and urgency as Fukushima lessons learned compliance requirements become voluntary. In other words, this resolution attempts to move the ball forward in Ann Arbor by correcting weaknesses acknowledged by our own county government at the same time that our country is in the midst of moving backward. With that in mind, the specific action of this resolution, the specific action is to advocate for state and federal responsibility to protect Ann Arbor residents regarding an issue which falls under state and federal jurisdiction. Therefore, by definition, the financial implications and logistical costs to the city should be relatively small, given that the goal is to seek accountability at a higher level of government. Perhaps at some later date, if those powers that be fail to hear the voice of the people, the city may want to come back and take another look at this issue with an eye toward greater self-reliance. But for now, this resolution is a fiscally responsible and reasonable approach to play within the system, consistent with sound science and informed by historical events.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kimberly Daly.
Hello, my name is Kim, and I've been part of the Washtenaw County community since 2012. I finished my PhD at the University of Michigan in December, and now I'm a postdoc. I've been very involved with spreading awareness about labor justice in the food system, and specifically how it relates to who picks our food. Michigan has a really large population of farm workers who are the workers that pick our food in the fields, and many of them travel from state to state following the seasons. And I wanted to share with you why we need to consider farm worker labor and their needs when thinking about how we're spending our money. The agricultural industry is based on a plantation model, with the first farm workers being African and indigenous slaves and indentured servants. In the 1940s, when many labor laws were being created, farm workers were left out. Today in the United States, farm workers are not federally recognized to collectively bargain, have overtime pay, minimum wage, have child labor protections, sexual assault protections, or many other worker protections that are usually guaranteed. There are no guaranteed shade, water, or bathroom breaks. In the United States, slavery is still occurring on farms, with 9 federally prosecuted cases since 2010, or occurring through 2010. However, there's a program developed by a group of farm workers called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers that has changed working conditions across farms in the United States. This group is an internationally recognized farm worker-led group that has been able to secure agreements through the Fair Food Program with 14 multi-billion-dollar corporations to virtually eliminate exploitation and abuse for tens of thousands of farm workers. Of these 14 corporations, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Subway, Chipotle, Burger King, and Walmart have all signed on. Wendy's refuses, which is why farm workers have asked consumers across the country to boycott them due to their continued support of labor abuses in the fields and in the supply chain. And many Michigan farm workers have been positively impacted by the Fair Food Program. And so this brings me to the present, which is the Michigan Union is going through a bidding process. Farm worker labor needs to be considered when we're thinking about vendors for the union. Many companies have submitted bids of over $10,000 through a confidential process that's not readily accessible to the student body. What we do know is that the university must invite companies to submit bids or attend informational meetings if they're interested. Wendy's used to be on our campus, and there is a large number of folks who don't want Wendy's to come back. We've been organizing since 2015 to ban Wendy's from our campus, and we've spoken to the union directors, procurement, the President's Advisory Council on Human Rights and Labor Standards, the regents, and the president, and all have said that they don't have power to prevent this corporation from coming back to campus, even though a 2017 report by the President's Advisory Council said that they should support the Fair Food Program. Wendy's has told local media that the previous franchisee did not seek renewal. However, a different franchisee could be involved with the bidding process, and it would be very powerful for you all to support the resolution by Elizabeth Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Chuck Lane.
Good evening. I come to speak to you about cannabis policy. First, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Council for rejecting the absurd requirement that cannabis businesses be 1,000 feet from any sort of child care home. Councilpersons Ackerman and Grand were astute in their analysis, and the mayor was brilliant. I kept saying that there was no logical connection between a cannabis business and child care homes, but the mayor hit the nail on the head. He saw the critical distinction between child care homes and public schools in that, as opposed to a school, no one ever comes to a child care center or leaves a child care center unless they are under adult supervision. So a dispensary hundreds of feet away could not be a real concern. This was a critically important vote. Critically important vote. The Reefer Madness gang got this distance requirement passed in Denver, and it totally killed the ability to implement Initiative 300, their social use initiative, which passed at the polls. Second, I'm letting you know that I seek cooperation with city leaders about the next steps for cannabis policy in our precious city. Our voters are the most advanced in the world regarding cannabis policy, and you know, or I'm letting you know, that there will be a ballot initiative in Ann Arbor in 2020 for the adult social use of cannabis. We could have coffee shops and restaurants and licenses for yoga studios or dance clubs or health clubs or whatever. How about a pot park? Wouldn't that be wonderful? We are seeking input from City Council and the Planning Commission and anyone else who cares to provide input. We're looking for Council to act during 2019, since 2020 will be taken up by signature gathering, fundraising, and winning the Ann Arbor Adult Social Use Initiative. So, I'm putting this in writing and handing it out tonight, and I will go to the Planning Commission tomorrow night. Please let no one ever say that anyone was rushing anything or felt left out. We would like all good input, but nothing will stop Ann Arbor from becoming the most advanced city on this planet in terms of the adult social use of cannabis. Let's set up a committee and work on it every week, or let's not. But please don't ever say that anyone here did not have plenty of time to think about this question and work on this question. Let's start tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, thank you, is Robin Tuck.
Hello, my name is Robin Tuck, and I live at 207 West William. I work for Shoshana Technologies, which is a local Ann Arbor-based software company. I'm a member of the local chapter of the Climate Mobilization, a group that encourages communities to join the fight to restore a safe climate. I know that about this time of year, the city will begin working on its annual budgeting process, and I'm speaking in the hopes that you will form a budget that prioritizes climate action. As you may know, we have less than 12 years to prevent the most catastrophic effects of climate change. Our greatest threat right now is inaction. Smaller cities like Ann Arbor can help turn the tide of climate inaction through funding. And a city that claims to prioritize the environment, we have had an underfunded sustainability department for too long. As a person with asthma who lives downtown, I have to deal with more air pollution now that there's increased traffic to the city. I have more asthma attacks, and I spend more money to maintain my quality of life. Continued inaction will only make this worse. City Council members, our community has listened over the last few months as arguments were made about how to fund climate action programs. I know many of you have said this is an important issue to you and that you understand the gravity. I am deeply hopeful that this means the budget will reflect these values that both the City Council and the citizens of Ann Arbor hold so dear. I believe I speak for myself and the community when I say that we trust you will follow through. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Henry Herskovitz.
Good evening. I want to share with Council a document known as the Hasbara Handbook. It teaches Jewish students how to promote Israel on campus. Hasbara is a Hebrew word that roughly translates to propaganda. Under the chapter heading 7 Basic Propaganda Devices, we find name-calling. I quote, "Through the careful choice of words, the name-calling technique links a person or an idea to a negative symbol. Former Israeli Minister of Education Shulamit Aloni exposed this technique in 2002, saying, 'Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody criticizes Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic.' Former Ann Arbor City Councilman Joan Lowenstein has written that I am a Holocaust denier. Other Ann Arbor citizens, such as Elena Schur and Eve Silberman, have joined in the application of this name-calling technique. The Southern Poverty Law Center has placed Ann Arbor, Michigan on its national hate map simply because of one person's association with a remembrance group. No proof of hate is evidenced. It's important to recognize that anti-Semite, Holocaust denier, and hater are mere epithets thrown at someone to silence them. If, by using the name Holocaust denier, Ms. Lowenstein and others think that I don't believe Jews were targeted by Germany's National Socialists, they are wrong. If they think I don't believe that Jews were shipped off to concentration camps, they are wrong. If they think I don't believe that partisan Jews were killed by Einsatzgruppen troops, they are wrong. And if they think I don't believe that vast numbers of Jews died in these concentration camps, they are likewise wrong. Holocaust Remembrance Day can be used as a day to reflect on world history, and I support it. But when examining an historical event becomes reason to silence a person's informed opinion, that historical event assumes the mantle of a religion, where one is shunned and silenced, and in some 17 countries imprisoned. Religion or history, it is up to us to decide. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Roger Rail.
I'm Roger Rail. I live at 3141 North Wagner Road. This is my 26th year as a citizen volunteer watching over the Paul Gelman Danaher 1,4-dioxane contamination and advocating for an effective, protective, community-acceptable cleanup that does not transfer cost and risk to the public. This is a much too long a statement to read in 3 minutes. It suffices to say that during the Engler administration, a lot of bad things happened. We're trying to correct that. A lot of the dioxane is heading east toward the river, but could come up and affect people's basements. But there's a component that's heading north around DuPont Circle that's showing up in high concentrations. How it got there, we don't know. There's not enough modeling to show, not enough sampling to show exactly how it got there. It's probably a result of relatively new observations that dioxane a lot of dioxin tends to move at high concentrations in very narrow pathways. It's not like pouring syrup on a table and seeing it flow. It's more like how poison ivy spreads, or how termites build their tunnels. It's very narrow pathways with some very high concentrations. We found some of those pathways, but there's other pathways we know must be there for these concentrations to get that far north. And if we don't find them, they may be bypassing some of the monitoring that's going on. So we need to have a little bit more monitoring. On her first day in office, Governor Whitmer issued a directive to encourage and empower state employees to speak up if they believe there's a threat to public health and safety. I believe now is the time for all local governments to do something similar, and to make sure that all levels of staff and officials, and even the public stakeholders, have enough understanding of this major problem facing our community, and they do so that they do their due diligence to match the scale of the problem, because it's a huge problem. It's not going away anytime soon, not in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes or our grandchildren's lifetimes. So we need to plan for the future on this. It's not going to get cleaned up in any short period of time, but we've got to protect our remaining water supplies. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rod Casey.
How is everybody doing? It is an honor and privilege to be in front of you. It's been 26 years since I've been out the loop, okay? So please be patient with me, with us. My name is Rod Casey. I stay at 521 Belmont in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And I'm here today to make a suggestion on the revenues that are coming from the new marijuana pass law. Well, first of all, I'd like to just tell you a brief story. There was a beautiful kid born 38 years ago. And this kid had lead poisoning, an unusual amount of lead poisoning. So the doctor, we couldn't figure out if it was the pain or what. We never did figure it out, really. But eventually, as he got older, he began to show some abnormal traits. And one of those traits was he started smoking weed. And weed seemed like it enhanced it, whatever was going on with him. So we realized he had some mental illness there. And we got him help. We could, tried the best we could. St. Joseph, other places. But eventually, this kid kept smoking and kept going on with his shenanigan. And eventually, 5 months ago, they discovered his body. And they assume it's suicide so far. And I'm just asking that y'all look at the problem a long distance. The gate's been open, okay? Whoever got mental illness or whatever can't handle it, they're going to be going mental illness. And I'm suggesting that the revenues go to drug treatment as well as mental illness, because there's going to be more than one Eugene or Eugenia, many other kids that's not even born yet, if we don't start being proactive in this area. So I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and definitely thank you for your patience, including the audience. Thank you. And with that, I'm done. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kai Patel.
Mayor Taylor, council members, and Michael Rain at U of M. Ann Arbor cares a lot about parks and pedestrians, and it cares a lot about how those pedestrians move about. This council disagrees at times about how and when things should be budgeted, but overall you do care about the pedestrians and how they interact with our environment. However, I want to draw your attention to a part of Ann Arbor that has become less safe, and that area has become less safe due to the actions taken by MDOT. Where I live, I oversee the Huron River, the train tracks, and the University of Michigan's Ann Arboretum. I see a lot of stuff. I have time lapse from the past week where the river froze, people passed the football on the ice, which is super dangerous. The river melted, and I even saw someone tagging the train bridge. Like I said, I see a lot. From my vantage point, I've watched a lot of people cross over from the B2B trail to the Arboretum. The people walk along a city path, they cross over a set of train tracks, and then they walk along another path that is owned by the university. This section did not have any no trespassing signs, and so it was clearly not obvious that following this path was trespassing. There were signs to stay off of the train bridge, but the path itself up and over the tracks was commonly used, and it was never clear that it was trespassing to use it. MDOT went ahead and they cut some trees. I believe, but I may be mistaken, that they cut some trees from the University of Michigan side of the tracks. Then those trees were dumped onto a trail that is on the city side of the track. If those trees were cut because they were diseased, then they should have been disposed of appropriately. I can't recall this operation ever being discussed at City Council, and I believe that since the university and the city are adjacent to this operation, then both of you must be stakeholders in some manner. You might be wondering, how did MDOT make it less safe? When MDOT blocked that path, people chose another way to get over the train tracks. Now what folks do is that they'll enter the railway another spot further down the railway and then walk alongside the tracks. The dumping of the trees essentially made it so that people would spend more time on the tracks instead of less time. And if anyone tries to cross the tracks and then struggles with getting past those trees, it also makes it so that they're spending more time on the tracks. This change made that area less safe. And instead of just quickly hopping over the tracks, people are spending more time on the tracks. How do I know this? I see the spot and I have time lapse that shows how people move in that area. Buckeye, this is a railway that has high-speed trains. Actually, the trains are slowing down because they're stopping at the Ann Arbor station. And if the train station is moved to Fuller, then that'll be going even slower at that point. This would be a new benefit to having a train station at Fuller. I can now argue that a crossing at that location would mean that it's safer to have a station at Fuller, and it would help with the interaction that people have with those parks. Buckeye, freight trains use this, and they don't slow down. Actually, very few freight trains go through this point, as they take routes along other railways, and those that come through seem to come at night. Buckeye, we are supposed to follow the law, yes. But Ann Arbor is a progressive city. We can work on this problem. And do you really want me to go through the list of laws and how Ann Arbor does things differently? Ann Arbor is a progressive city. Ann Arbor is a pedestrian city. Ann Arbor is a park city. Let's fix this problem. How do we fix it? It would be helpful if the trees were removed. We could put a train station crosswalk there. I have a link on Twitter. You can check it out. The way I see it, the city and the university should work together to MDOT to fix this problem. Don't try to cover it up with a broken Band-Aid. Let's just cut a tree and hope no one notices dump. These are my thoughts, not the university's or MDOT's. Thanks for listening to my concern.
Thank you. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Griswold.
First, I'd like to announce that effective Sunday, March 3rd, I'm going to start having office hours in the council workroom, which is the room right behind me. It will be on the Sundays before council meetings. And there has been talk about having caucuses, as we did many years ago, and if there's enough interest from other council members, then that may become a reality as well. Secondly, I'd like to thank all of the A2 Safe Transport members and people who support pedestrian safety who came tonight, and they came to listen because we were expecting a plan from the city administrator. I would like to acknowledge that plan and thank Howard Lazarus for the work that's been done. However, there's also opportunities to do so much more. And one of the main issues that I see is that we're getting a lot of data, but we don't have a champion for pedestrian safety. We don't have a champion for Vision Zero who has the expertise that we need. And when we talk about adding street lighting at crosswalks, it's a very complicated issue. It's not just putting a street light up, because more brightness frequently creates a more dangerous situation. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to give you all the information, but we need to do it right. The Federal Highway Administration has identified what the appropriate illumination standards are, and I hope that we can work forward and, as part of the spirit of Vision Zero, do it right the first time, because we know it's expensive. It's expensive not only in dollars, but in lives and in serious injuries when we don't do it right the first time. And lastly, I would like to plead that we please add a category to our A2 Fix-It system for crosswalks, because the community has information. They want to share in the process. They want to share in the solution. And so we need to make it as easy as possible. So please add that crosswalk category. We've been waiting since 2014, and we need it now, not after a committee analyzes the system. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank everyone for speaking tonight. I just want to add on the back of the Gelman Plume talk that the monthly card meeting is tomorrow from 10 to 12 a.m. at the Washtenaw Service Center. MDEQ update will be happening there, and there's always something to talk about when it comes to the Gelman Plume and our water issues. And for those of you who may or may not have heard of this, but just today, Governor Whitmer reorganized the MDEQ with Executive Action 2019-02, and so that was good news for everyone, because some may recall that under the previous administration, the DEQ was reorganized to have 7 primary goals, and protecting the environment was 6 goals, and protecting the environment was 4th on the list of 6 items. And so we're hoping that this reorganization will continue the promises that politicians have made, and also that the people demand that our Great Lakes water resources are protected, especially here in the state of Michigan. So yeah, come out and get involved in the Gelman Plume. It's a dynamic situation. There's a lot going on with that. There's a lot of people pushing for clean water issues right now, and I think you can feel things coming to a head here. I think it's a good time for clean water in Michigan, and so thank everyone for advocating for their causes, like the pedestrian folks and the water causes. The more the merrier when it comes to pushing for change with their water issues. Thank you.
Councilmember Bannister.
I would like to add on to what Councilmember Griswold said about having office hours right here behind us in the council chambers on Sunday evenings. And I believe we were shooting for 7 to 9.
Yes.
Yeah, 7 to 9, and to talk about pedestrian safety. And I know Ward 2, Ward 1, but you're all welcome to come out and join us on Sunday evenings. Is that every Sunday evening or just before meetings?
Before meetings.
Okay. More on that to come. I also wanted to invite everyone to a Ward 1 meeting that Councilmember Hayner and I will be at. James Daniel, our longstanding Ward 1 precinct delegate, has been hosting Finding Your Political Voice meetings, and one is coming up, not this Wednesday, but next week on Wednesday, February 13th, from 6:30 to 8:30 at the Arrowwood Clubhouse up on Pontiac Trail, and everyone's welcome to join us. We'll be talking about all things police oversight, water quality, pedestrian safety, whatever the audience and the people who show up want to talk about. So please join us for that. And thank you, James Daniel, for doing those still. And a couple other little things. A big group of us were at Northside STEAM last Friday and giving Northside STEAM School a $15,000 Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grant to develop a solar curriculum for kindergarten through 8th grade students. And so what I just wanted to remind all of you, everyone else, is that those grants, Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grants, are available to the public, and you go to our a2gov.org and can fill out an application. And for your neighborhood, it could be, last year we had one on compost, and now this one on solar. So it's all surrounding our sustainability goals. And lastly, I just wanted to congratulate everyone for surviving the polar vortex experience last week, and let you know that if you see a person in distress on the outside in the cold this winter, that we do have a lot of information here at the city about through the county how we have daytime and overnight winter warming centers, and a lot of that goes through the county and through the Delanus Center. But if you, as I actually saw a couple people in distress, so if you see someone, perhaps, someone with mental illness, not properly dressed, about to get too cold, we do have help for them, and you can also call 911 if it's that kind of an emergency. And also, lastly, the City of Ann Arbor provides free sand and salt mixtures, and that's also on our website. And the piles were all used up and frozen this week, but my understanding they're being replenished. So everyone can go out to 721 North Main, Huron Hills Golf Course, and then various parks, Veterans Memorial and Leslie Park and so forth, to stock up on the sand and salt mixtures for our sidewalks. Thank you.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the more than 60 people who applied to serve on the Independent Community Police Oversight Council. There are 4 of us that myself, Councilmembers Ackerman, Lum, and Ramwali will be making some recommendations in about a month's time to council for who should serve on that committee. But thank you. It was incredible to see with such a short time frame how many residents answered that call to serve on this commission, because it's going to be an incredibly important task. So one of the pieces of this process is that we are seeking community input, and that doesn't need to be formal. The list of all of those who applied is now, I believe, up on the city's website. So if you have any feedback that you'd like to give to either advocate, or you just like us to know something about one of the applicants, any concerns that you might have, please do feel free to contact any of the 4 of us. We'll be meeting together and sharing that feedback amongst ourselves. That can be a phone call, it can be a text, it can be an email. It can be a conversation if you see us out and about. So please do give us that feedback, whether it's something formal from a group. We're happy to take recommendations from specific groups in the community or organizations, but we do want to hear your feedback. It can be difficult to ascertain just from as much as I appreciate it, from a 3 to 6 page application on paper. So if there's something else that you'd like us to know about applicants, please do reach out. If you're reaching out to me, and if I don't pick up the phone, just shoot me a text and I'll get back to you about a good time to have that conversation. So thank you. Oh, I also want to just shout out congratulations to Dr. Daly. I have no idea if preserving hydration dynamics and aqueous PEG solutions is a good thing or a bad thing, but a PhD in physical chemistry is impressive, and I'm sure it was a long haul. So congrats.
Further communication from council? Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I just wanted to say, to echo the sentiments Councilmember Grand had expressed about the ICPOC and the public's input on all the applicants that have submitted their names and information to us. It's a very critical time for us to come together and make some important decisions and get that commission on the right footing. And if there's anybody in the public who can help us, that would be greatly appreciated. And secondly, I just really would like to extend thanks to the city staff during the polar vortex out there cleaning the streets and keeping the city functioning in a very difficult time. And also to the firefighter who was injured trying to save somebody's life in Ward 2. Very tragic event in our community, and I hope the firefighter speedy and fast recovery, and just an unsung hero, and I just want to make sure that person is recognized. Thank you.
Further communication? I have like to recommend the following nominations for your consideration: to the Commission on Disability Issues, Christiana Allen Pipkin; to the Human Rights Commission, Dilip Das; and also to the Human Rights Commission, Diana Cass, for discussion at our discussion at our next meeting. And I too, I touched upon it very briefly in the introduction, but would like to echo what Councilmember Ramlawi says with respect to the work done by city staff over the past week or so to keep our city functioning during the polar vortex. It is. There's a lot of planning that goes on. There's a lot of redundancy, and it is in times like these where that planning comes to fruition, where folks, forethought to the task at hand and dedication to the task at hand shines through. And this, of course, is of particular note with respect to first responders. As Councilor Ramlawi said, we did have a firefighter who was injured in the course of striving to save one of our residents from an active fire. And there was a tragic fatality at that site, and our firefighter is injured, and we do wish him a speedy and full recovery. None of this is, we don't. It's easy for civilians, myself included, along the way, to not recollect that there are people there ready to sacrifice for us, our first responders, day in, day out, 24/7, 365. And it's times like these, under conditions like these, when it's meet to recollect it and to give thanks for it. We now have before us the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Hayner, then Lum.
You want to go, Councilman? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to move to pull 3 items from the consent agenda for further discussion. That
Which
would
are?
be CA 8, CA 17, and CA 18.
We'll put those immediately after the consent agenda. Further discussion of the consent agenda?
Thank you.
Councilmember Lum?
Thanks. I wasn't going to pull 17 and 18, but now if they're pulled, I'll save my comments.
You'll hold fire.
Yeah, exactly. So to CA7, the Board of Insurance recommendations, this resolution includes the annual renewals of several city insurance coverages, including property, general, and excess public entity liability, fiduciary, pollution, aviation, cyber liability, and a couple of others. The premiums for the year are essentially flat from last year, and the total is about $950,000. Highland Insurance is our third-party advisor on these, and I appreciate the excellent work and guidance they provide us. And I'd also like to extend thanks and acknowledgement of the excellent work done by our city treasurer, Mr. Matt Horning, and so extend thanks as well to both Mr. Horning and Sarah Singleton for all their work and support. I'm on the Board of Insurance along with Councilmember Nelson, and so we reviewed these policies and discussed these policies, and they really do a lot of good work on thorough analysis before these recommendations are brought forward. The second item, CA10, it's the Riverview Drive Dover Place Sewer and Water Project. This project was deferred to this year because bids came in high last year and the project was rebid in the fall. The project is certainly necessary as there are failing sewers in the area, and I'm glad to see it proceeding, as you can imagine, the neighbors. For those of you who know this area off Geddes, you know the roads are very narrow and there's little work room. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing it up is to provide a heads up to residents in the area that once construction starts, which will be sometime in April, through access will be available only twice per hour during the day at the top and bottom of the hour, and after construction is completed for the day. City staff recognize that this is really disruptive for folks and have been meeting and communicating with the neighbors about the project. That's great, and I'd like to thank them for that. And I'm sure staff, and this is a plea, I know they'll do this, will be communicating frequently with impacted neighbors as we get closer to the project start date. Thank you.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? All in favor? All in favor of the consent agenda as modified, that is to say accepting CA 8, 17, and 18. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The modified consent agenda is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 6. That is all. CA 8, resolution to approve the Board of Review guidelines for poverty exceptions from property taxation of principal residence pursuant to MCL 211.7U, moved by Councilmember Hayner, second by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of CA 8, Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't pull this out because I'm opposed to this move in any way. It's just, as a new council member, I was not aware that this went on with the city, and I thought it was interesting, and I think in the light of the county equity initiatives and our own equity initiatives that, and also our efforts to fight poverty in the community and affordable housing efforts that are included in that I just wanted to say a few words about it. And I'm, perhaps in the future I won't pull it out, but just take Councilmember Lum's advice and or example rather, and just speak to it. But it's an interesting thing that we do here, and for those of you at home who don't know what's going on, that there's an opportunity for folks who are at a certain level of poverty here in the city to apply for an exemption from the public charges, which are our city mills, our city, and the portion of our property tax that the city levies. And every year we set this, and it was interesting to me to see that. And I also thank staff for their timely responses to my questions about it. I question the levels and the levels of participation because I wanted to see if there was a situation where if we just did a little bit more, it would envelop many more folks in our community and make it lives that much easier for them. I'm not sure that it would because we already do pretty well. But so I was basically questioning the size of the limits, the poverty limits, because I'm seeing this in a lot of situations here in the city. When we discuss affordable housing, we talk about a percentage of AMI, which is area median income. We know Ann Arbor is a very wealthy community, and only Chelsea has higher limits than we do right now. Our limits could go up a little bit more. So for a family of four, which is what I am, if we make $38,000 a year or less and we pass a few asset tests, it is that we don't have any assets, then I would be able to file for a poverty exemption from the public charges. And I just think that's interesting, and I appreciate the administrator putting all the information forward, and I would encourage those out there among us who may find themselves in this situation to apply. And I hope that the administrator would, I don't even know what the process is for applying for this, and so I appreciate the questions and answers on that, and maybe anyone else would like to speak to it, but I fully support the idea that we do this, and I'd expand it if I could, because it's an expensive community. It's a tough town to live in. And if you might be somebody who owned their house 20 years or 30 years, now you're retired, you're on a fixed income, or you're not doing well for a medical reason or another hardship, it's nice to know that you can seek some remedy from the city, and that we've committed, if I read it correctly, approximately $1.6 million a year in waived property tax collection for this. So it shows that we are doing some things to reach out to address the poverty issues here in this town. So thank you. I support it. I just wanted to say a few words and get some other council input on it.
Mr. Crawford,
Thank you, Commissioner. One correction, we don't provide $1.6 million in foregone tax expenditures. That's the amount of taxable value that the Board of Review reduces it. The actual expenditure is about $25,000 or less. My name is Mark Perry, and I'm the assessor of the city of Ann Arbor. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have, but the process is fairly simple. We begin with the statutory exemption, which the legislature passed back in 1980. Then the statute requires that each city, each township, develop their own guidelines, and that's the guidelines before you. The last time those guidelines were updated was in 2014. We want to refresh them to bring them to today's economy, since things have changed since 2014. It's an application process. The university, through its senior housing, they help complete the forms. Professional tax preparers, our staff, and the Washtenaw County Treasurer's Office also makes the citizens aware of the program and provides copies of the guidelines. So it's an application process. The income threshold, ours is $24,000. So in other words, those that make less than $24,000 would pass the income test. Then there's the $25,000 asset. If you have less than $25,000, you've passed that criteria. Then there is the, you have to own and occupy your home. So it's only for those that own, and we want to make sure the program keeps people in their home. We do not, as part of the asset test of the $25,000, include the value of the home nor your vehicle, because you need to get to work. So those are just the highlights of the test and the application process, and it goes before the Board of Review, and they process either grant the exemption or deny it because of eligibility.
Councilmember Henry, you still have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. We've had some fine conversations over the last couple months. It's been a pleasure meeting you. So is there any statutory guidelines as to, I know that we've set by the resolution what we can adjust our rates to be on top, as long as they don't go below the federal guidelines. Is there any statutory limitation on what we set these figures to be? Like, could we, well, I know we do 2 times
On the
plus.
ceiling?
Yeah.
Not statutorily, no.
Okay.
Just the minimum.
Because if we're only foregoing $25,000 worth of property, you know, general fund revenue for this program, and it's reaching 45 or 50 families or something like that.
I want to remind you, though, that the income test is only 1 of 4.
Right.
So you're going to have to pass all 4. It's not partial passage. You have to comply with all 4 tests.
Have the number of people served, has the number of people served gone up, down? It's been pretty flat over the years? I'm just curious. I know we had opportunity for these questions, but I typoed one. I asked for 2000, I meant to ask for 2014's, what the older current guidelines were, and I asked for 2004's, and thank you for digging that up. I was looking at the ones that we were changing from. But I just wondered has it been pretty consistent as the amount, or have we noticed more people taking advantage of this?
The 2 components that change fairly consistently year over year is the income threshold and the average level of assessment of the community, the 150% component. Those are really the only 2 that change. The 25,000 is fixed by resolution.
Okay. What's that? Councilman Bannister, you want to go ahead?
Well, I was just wondering about the other 4 tests. So you have to have assets under 25,000, you have to be low income, and then your home itself has.
Owner occupied.
Owner occupied,
Yeah.
and then the value of the home?
Has to be less than 150% of the average residential assessment in the community. Currently, it's that 150 is 247,000.
Yeah.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Councilman Brumlally.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. And just like Councilmember Hayner, I did have a couple questions on this that were responded to, and I appreciate that. There is just one cause of concern for me, and that's for the 1-person threshold. I'm just looking at the math, and you're looking at nearly a 20% increase for this year, if my math is right, from the limits that were set last year to the limits this year. I just find that a bit high of a jump.
The reason for that is the resolution from 14 required the federal income level be adjusted back in 14, 5%, the lower of CPI or 5% per year. So it's been indexed over all of those years by the lower of CPI or 5. And what we wanted to do was make it very simple. The federal guidelines are published every single year and are referenced in the statute. So why don't we just make it a multiple of the federal poverty guideline? And so we're switching from this indexing from 2014, which really the indexing started back when the original indexing resolution was adopted back in 1999. So it shows you that over those compounding years from 99 through last year, it was only, what, 20,000 something. So by just taking 2 times the federal guidelines, it's 24,000. Yes, it's a gap, but this is the first year we're switching to this more simpler and more consistent with what other jurisdictions use, not just in this county, but in other parts of the state. SIO is ×2. City of Dexter is ×2. So we just, and by the way, the origin of SIO in Dexter was best practice. I think there was a question on best practice from one of the council members. It was from Birmingham and Royal Oak. Those were the benchmarks, the best practices that the assessment community in Southeast Michigan adopted. So real simply, we're just converting from an indexing from 1999, refreshed in 2014, just to make it simple. That's all we're doing.
So these will be updated every year
Annually.
based on the federal
Federal guidelines, correct.
guidelines.
Right.
I mean, it's nothing for me to, stop the train on, but just looking at it, it is a significant jump for a one person. And based on the number of people applying for this hardship program, I don't think it's enough to mount any sort of opposition to this new table of numbers. But it just surprised me that that would be the new, floor placed. And we do have the flexibility of doing something under 2 times.
Yes. Every year, this is going to have to come before council. It's a statutory thing that whenever anything changes, including the threshold, it's got to come before you for approval.
Okay.
So
I think we'll be taking a bigger, deeper look at it next year. I just feel that that's a fairly high number, to be honest with you. It's nearly $400 a week that someone needs to earn.
Let me clarify something, and I think it was mentioned over here. The $24,000 is the ceiling, the maximum amount you can earn to be eligible. So if you earn $30,000, $40,000, you're not eligible. It's the $24,000 and less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it probably should be lower, but that's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Further discussion?
So just briefly, because
Councilor Hanna.
you may have heard some chattering going on over here. So this property value, this 150% test, I got that right. So it's $247,000. If your house is worth more than that, then it's considered a failure of one of these asset type tests. It's one of the 4 tests. If your house is worth more than $250,000,
You would not be eligible.
you'd not be eligible. So
Right.
it's literally, you could be house poor here in Ann Arbor. You could have a house that, because of its location, you've been in here for years, has skyrocketed in value, but you're impoverished and it exempts you from taking advantage of this program. That's correct? Okay. And that guideline is set by us, that 150%. And then I also saw that in the border review process, they talk about self-imposed poverty. And I couldn't find a definition for that anywhere, and so I wondered how that's decided. How do you decide that somebody is self-imposed poverty? I mean, that seemed like that's another way that the Board of Review can reject an application, and I found that a curious definition.
Well,
I couldn't find a definition.
You've heard about real estate rich, cash poor.
Yeah.
That kind of stems from that theory. So let me kind of give you an example. Let's say someone has large credit card debt. That would be self-imposed. You have discretionary income and non-discretionary income, and that's where it gets in there. The other thing I want to go to is on the new language, we say that, hey, the Board of Review can take exception to unusual one-time expenditure circumstances. And you list them on there. Those are not self-imposed. They're just, let's say you have a medical or something akin to something you have no control over. That would be an unimposed. So is it is there an objective definition? No. It's, we have to leave it up to the board to make those decisions. But we've completed or made the application as thorough as we can to give the board enough information to make those judgment calls.
Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
All opposed? It's approved. CA 17, resolution to approve amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Stantec Consulting Services for cost of services for water and wastewater, and to appropriate funds from the water supply system in the amount of $27,495. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of CA 17. Councilmember Hayner.
I would just ask maybe we treat these as a whole, the two of these. Can we discuss them both at the same time? And I'm not here to talk about the water issue, just the contract. So the reason I pulled these off is because in seeking additional information and clarification for those of us who weren't on council through the entire first process with Stantec, I supported the idea that we take a new look at these rates and the data that went to it. Now I see before me two contracts, and one with the current, with the supplier of the current cost of service study, Stantec, for $27,000, one with a third party for $27,000. And what I didn't understand about 17 was, why are we paying $27,000 to a company to come and tell us what they already told us before on a $250,000 contract? I can't believe that it cost us $27,000 to get a few people from Stantec in a work session with us to discuss the work they did. So I'm not a big fan of supporting CA 17, but I'll support 18, which lets a third party take a look at it. Although we did have a member of the public speak to her concerns about 18, so I'll leave that for others to discuss, but I understand her concerns.
Good evening. Craig Hupy, Public Services Area Administrator, and with me I also have Marty Prashant, my Chief of Staff, and Lynn Chamowitz, a Fund Manager. The need for an extension or an additional amount for the Stantec contract is the database is very large. There is a model that Stantec has developed for handling and manipulating the database, and to be efficient and effective for Arcadis to look at that database and to ask questions and understand it and query the database. We believe, and Stantec needs to be at the table to navigate through that huge mass of information.
So we have a situation with the original contract where we actually don't, if I read the responses right, we don't own the results of that
We
fully.
own a license for our use.
A license to access this data about our
Well,
system.
it's our data, we own it.
Right.
But it's so huge, we don't have the ability or the expertise to navigate through it.
It's shocking to me. I've had good results with their IT stuff. I mean, I understand it.
I look at Marty, or Lynn, I don't know how many points are in the database, but it's in the millions.
Councilor Hayner, you still have the floor.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, and thank you, Mr. Hupy. I share the concerns about the fact that, we have before us these two consulting agreements, and they're both about $27,500 each. The one with Stantec, again, the consultant who provided the support for the restructuring put in place in July, and the other with Arcadis of Michigan, which is a well-recognized firm that finished second in the original RFP process. And I would just reiterate that the purpose of this is to take a fresh eyes look at the restructuring, including identifying feasible rate structure alternatives for council to consider. I'm confident that Arcadis is capable of doing exactly that if given the opportunity. If they are told they have a clean sheet and not told their job is essentially to confirm what was done before. I've been concerned all along that this would be viewed as a check-the-box exercise, and there would not be a good faith effort to genuinely look at alternatives. That concern, again, is reinforced when I see two contracts, including this one with Stantec, the consultant responsible for what we want to revisit, rather than just a single contract with the new firm, Arcadis. I guess I could understand the need to pay Stantec a little bit to transfer the data they accumulated, but the fact that the fees are the same for both firms suggests to me that Stantec will have a prominent role in revisiting what they recommended in the first place. And that, to me, does not sound like the genuine, fresh eyes look we're looking for, but perhaps I'm wrong. In response to one of my questions today, it was indicated that the scope of this review is limited to just the alternatives specifically listed in the resolution in December. Arcadis are the experts, and I certainly expect Arcadis to at least inform us, if not fully analyze the full range of feasible alternatives available to council. That's the purpose of this whole thing. If council wants to pursue one of the alternatives and that requires further analysis, that's fine. We can do that. But council needs to have the full list of alternatives to consider up front. And there's really a lot that needs to be reviewed here. It's not just the high-level structure and customer classes, it's also the tiers, the cost allocation methodology and treatment of fixed versus variable costs. And importantly, the one thing council seemed to agree on all along is that we need to find a way to implement tiering for commercial customers. We cannot forget that commercial customers contribute more to the peaking in the system than residential customers do. And I would just refer my colleagues, particularly the new folks that weren't here back in March, we had a work session, and in that PowerPoint illustrated that commercial usage peaks like residential, and the amount of variation is actually more for commercial than for residential. I can get into the details on that, but I won't do that now. And that's really an very important point, because the fact that commercial customers contribute more to the peaking in the system, the percentage, I will just note, the percentage volatility is greater for commercial than residential, and also the absolute level of volatility is greater for commercial than for residential, is critical because this was all premised on as a cost of service, and that the cost to serve residential because of the peaking phenomenon is greater for residential, only to discover that the volatility and the absolute level of volatility is greater for commercial than residential. So if this review does not come up with a plan to implement tiering for commercial, then it's failed on a key objective. I'm not crazy about spending another $50,000 on this. I'm sure none of us are, but this is important and, in my view, worth it. The restructuring resulted in a $2 million annual transfer in costs from multifamily customers to single-family customers. That's real money for folks. So taking a bit more time and spending a bit more money to better understand the alternatives is a good investment. So I'll be supporting CA 17 and 18 tonight, but I, again, probably for the third or fourth time or more, urge the administrator to ensure this is indeed a fresh eyes evaluation. And that means that when the report is ultimately presented to council, it identifies the range of feasible alternatives for us to consider. A report that essentially states Arcadis reviewed Stantec's numbers and they're okay, is not what council wants or needs. Thank you all for listening.
Councilmember Nelson.
I've been educated in one thing that Councilmember Lum said, which was that I didn't understand that Arcadis was the second choice in the RFP originally chose Stantec. That's right?
Yes. They were on the short list.
Yeah, I don't know if they were second or third. They were brought in for interviews.
Okay, well, so I'm not sure I was here for the work session. I know I watched the PowerPoint that Stantec presented with the original water rates, not from this table, obviously. But I guess my question is, was most of the work done by Stantec actually collecting the data, or was it organizing the data?
I will attempt to answer that, but I will also look at Lynn, who worked with it. It was collecting the data, organizing it, scrubbing it, and then analyzing what the data was telling them.
And that's the same thing that we would have expected Arcadis to do had we chosen them for the RFP.
Yeah, a similar process, yes.
Okay, then I guess I'm just confused if they are professional entities that do the same work. It's not clear to me why they would not be, why Arcadis would not be competent to look at the work of Stantec and analyze it without a 50% partnership with Stantec. I mean, if they're in the same business doing the exact same work.
They could do that. It would take them much longer and cost much more without the guidance of Stantec to help navigate the database and understand the model that has been developed.
I just find that confusing. Okay.
Mr. Lazarus, can you?
Greg, what was the cost here of the initial Stan Tech contract, you remember?
$256,000.
So if Arcadis was to start over, you would anticipate the cost would be much, much greater than the just under 25,000 that's
yes.
in this. Scope of work for Stan Tech is basically laid out to provide review of the data and then present it to Arcadis. The Arcadis scope of work, if you look at task 2, section 2.1, talks about some of the options the council brought up and directed us to look at are eliminating the residential fourth tier rate that was recently adopted, to reinstate the rate structure in place prior to adoption of the new rates, to provide volume-based pricing tiers for commercial customer class, to look at new customer classes to better segregate customers by type, look at a single flat water rate for all customers, look at phasing of the adopted new rate, and then offer other alternatives identified as part of the peer review. So I think that's very much in line with what council asked us to do. We are fortunate to have two exceptional firms collaborating on the effort to give council more options. I think as we talked a little bit at the last time, some of those options will have a little bit of a risk assessment with them from a legal and regulatory standpoint as well. So in the end, having one contractor who gathered the data and organized it and ran the model, provide that to the second firm is actually a better value for the city.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? CA 17 is approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the.
You want a roll call?
Let's do a roll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll do a roll call.
I wasn't aware that you were there, that you were a no vote.
It's okay.
No. Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Eaton.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Nope.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Motion carries.
CA 18, resolution to approve a professional services agreement with Arcadis, Michigan LLC for rate study review and alternative rate design analysis, and to appropriate funds from the water supply system in the amount of $27,495. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of CA 18. Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on this one, I just wanted to make sure that I read this properly, that it says that as the second firm analyzes the data, they will generate these reports. And I would hope that some of this, I didn't see it specifically in here, and so maybe I'm not reading the right document, but I hope that some of this had a work session with the council members who weren't here for the prior aspects of this. We have a little Q&A with these folks before this report is submitted, Mr. Lazarus or Mr. Hupy?
Yes.
Okay, that's all part of this bid?
We have a March date work session with council to discuss the outcome of their analysis.
For everyone.
We get any input before the analysis begins, or just as described in here, because it says feasible, justifiable alternatives, including but not limited to the list that our administrator just read off. I beg your pardon? So I just want to make sure that we get a little FaceTime with them before the process, at the beginning of the process.
That was not envisioned in the scope of services.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty robust suite of options to look at, though. If you have other thoughts, if you would pass them to me, Okay, I'll do that.
Further discussion? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I mean, I was not supportive of going to do this additional analysis, but I'm supporting it tonight because I want to respect the decision of this body, and we asked staff to come forward, and I think they came back to us with a reasonable and not terribly expensive alternative. I know Ms. Juneau has reached out to some of us before, and I just want to respond that I agree. I think you were subsidizing water costs of single-family homeowners, and I don't think it's fair to go back. I also don't want to pit condo owners against renters, against any class of people. I just want this to be equitable and fair. So I will be supporting CA18, but will not be supporting something that I think that goes against the intent of what we had before in this change, which was equity in paying for water.
Further discussion, Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, very much like Councilmember Grand, going through this process last summer was a real tough pill to swallow. But I think the resolution we came to is the most equitable resolution. What concerns me in listening to some of the discussion tonight is, I don't want this to be perceived as we're just going to keep going and getting studies until we get the one that, happens to recommend what the desired political solution is. I think we're asking for very technical reports. I believe that we should evaluate them as such, and instead of perhaps questioning how these two organizations talk to each other or whether they are giving us an honest set of fresh eyes, I think ultimately all of these people are guided by a strong set of professional ethics and guidelines that require them to give us their best professional advice, and that's why we hire consultants. So I'm not of the mindset to question how these two organizations work together, and I simply want to caution the rest of this body to hear what they have to say with an open mind. Thank you.
Councilmember Romaloy.
Thank you. I just have a question on whether there'll be more data that they're going to be looking at, or are they going to be revisiting the same data points? Is there anything new that's going to be looked at?
No, they are using the existing data set.
So there won't be...
The dollar values involved in these contracts are nowhere near enough to go out and collect data and add it on.
So the same incomplete data perhaps that was there the first time will still exist?
I would hesitate to call it incomplete with the size of the data set they looked at.
Okay.
There is, for some of the commercial, for the commercial, maybe not as detailed by customer, by usage. That may be one of their recommendations coming out of it. I don't know. They may say, if you want to change your commercial tiering, this is the data you need to do that. So that may be one of the outcomes. I'm not presupposing what they're going to tell us.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lum.
Thank you. Yeah, we do want to look at commercial tiering. I've stated that till I'm blue in the face. And when this information, and again, you heard, everybody knows what, how the system behaves, what types of usage peak the most. Turns out it's commercial, not residential. And I did ask for commercial data throughout the review. And in response to a question about what Arcadis would be reviewing and if there's going to be new data collection and analysis, staff responded, if during the review of existing data set a mechanism is identified to achieve a tiered commercial structure, additional cost of service work will likely be necessary. Then I think we need to plan for that because, on the one hand, we're told that they apparently have the data, but then to that I would say then there needs to be the will to utilize that data and to look at a fair commercial tiering structure that is consistent with the cost of service. Again, we were told throughout that peak demand drives how you have to build the system. And we know what we know about peak demand, residential vis-a-vis commercial. And we were only given we were only given one restructuring model, just one. No alternatives. And that's why we're saying we want a fresh eyes look. This isn't political. It's about equity. It's about having the data to, and that includes obviously the commercial users, to be presented with other viable alternatives for our consideration.
I'm going to support this tonight, although I think it and the prior is not necessary. I am going to support it for the reasons that Councilmember Grand and Smith indicated out of comity to other members of council who are interested in taking another look at this issue. As we do take another look at this issue, as the consultant comes back with their recommendation, their analysis, I guess I'd like to touch upon a couple of things. First, if they are going to take a look at the results, coming back and saying that Stantec got it right is one of the options. It's one of the options because that is a perfectly, as far as we have no reason to think that is not a perfectly rational thing that the second consultant could come back and say. If they're going to take a fresh look based upon the data could very well tell us that Stantec got it right. And we are asking them to take a look at the full range, and I expect that they'll do so because we've given them a broad a broad set of options for them to consider. Further, and this has been said before on numerous occasions, but it warrants repeating, and that is the reason why Stantec came forward and did not present to us a tiered rate system with respect to the commercial side of our ratepayers. Ratepayers on the residential side were asked to provide are asked to be charged or are being charged differential rates because of a couple of things. One, because they do have within them, within that known set of users, of ratepayers who have consistency among them, who are themselves sufficiently similar so as to justify the imposition of a broad set of similarities. That user set has used water in a way that requires the system to be built to meet their peaking infrastructure. The peaking on the commercial users does exist, and if among the commercial users there was sufficient consistency so that that we could provide a tiered rate system within that class, I have every confidence that we would do so. No one has any interest in doing anything other. It was reported to us by the consultant that that user class, the commercial user class, has insufficient similarity among the user class to support the justifiable, the rational imposition of a tiered rating system within that class. Whether or not the new consultant comes forward and says, well, if you cut this class this way, we think you can get to a rational and justifiable and reasonable and proper and legally defensible articulation of a commercial subset that would authorize authorize you to move forward and impose the higher capacity rate, the higher capacity costs onto that user set, fine. Then that's what we'll end up doing. It's important to note that the result of that would be is that the first CCF among the commercial user class would decrease considerably in terms of cost. The last CCF would increase considerably. Right now, the entire commercial class pays for peaking, and that essentially replicates the injustice that our prior rate system imposed upon our residential customers. Previously, our residential customers, one set obligated the system to be built to allow peaking, and that is the single-family homes. Those are the residential user class of people who enjoyed peaking, and by extension obligated the system to be built for that purpose. Knowing what we know now, we know that that residential users who are so situated have been requiring multifamily users to subsidize their rates for years, and we are in the process of fixing that with this rate set. Whether we can do so in a tweaked fashion, an alternate fashion, whether we can achieve that same goal of implying our legally obligated cost of service to articulated user sets. That's what this Arcadis contract will seek to achieve. But I think it's important to note that the ratification of the current that the ratification of the current rate set is among the range of possible alternatives. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All, I'm sorry, I don't recollect. All opposed? It's approved with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. We now come to 2 public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about a specific item on the agenda. To speak at a public hearing, one must speak about that specific item on the agenda. Speakers do not need to have signed up in advance to speak at a public hearing. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we would be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 108, Disorderly Conduct of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor to add a new Section 969, Trespass. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, resolution to approve the Payne annexation, 0.48 acres, 245 Orchard Hills Drive. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. A1, we have before us our work session minutes of January 14 and regular session meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2019. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes? Moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Romlawi. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? They're approved. B1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 108, Disorderly Conduct of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor to add a new Section 969, Trespass. Moved by Councilmember Romlawi, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of B1.
Well, as a sponsor of this, I feel moved to talk about it, and there's been a lot of concern in the community regarding this, and the fact they may threaten civil liberties and take away the rights of the disadvantaged. And there's nothing that I have listened to or read that would substantiate those fears. Again, it's a change in the way that trespass is handled, and it'll now be handled by the city. And it will give the offenders better access to due process, and would ultimately make everybody who is a part of the situation in a better place in terms of execution and understanding of trespass. And I just see this as a progressive measure, and I don't see any concern to think that it violates people's rights or makes folks in the community who have a higher exposure to this more susceptible to criminal charges. So it has my support, and it has the support of the Human Rights Commission. It has the support of our police chief and our legal department, and I would hope that this body takes this ordinance and passes it tonight.
Councilmember Grant.
Just thanks to Ms. Lay, who's in the room, as well as the members of the Human Rights Commission and the Ann Arbor Police Department for coming together over a long period of time and really listening and having active dialogue and making this an ordinance that's going to work for our community. Earlier this evening, it got buried in the consent agenda, but we put a lot of resources into our sobriety courts, our veterans courts, our drug treatment court, and a large part of the motivation of moving trespass into the city and taking it from the county was so that we could provide better access to individuals who are charged with trespass to these critical resources in our community. And I know that was a significant part of what motivated Ms. Slay to do this work, so thank you so much.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum, then Bannister.
Yeah, just also like to acknowledge the work of City Attorney Slay, her good work on this, and council members from Lowry and Grand for their contributions at the Human Rights Commission to this discussion. And because this is, what you brought forward is a more straightforward, direct, and timely mechanism to address trespassing as an APB, excuse me, citation rather than going the full-blown county prosecutor route, which can take a lot of time. And so this streamlined approach is noted by Councilmember Amlawi, supported by the Police Department and the Human Rights Commission, which are obviously important endorsements. And I know you spend a lot of time and expertise on this, Attorney Slay, and thank you very much for all the work that you put into this. Thank you.
Councilmember Bannister.
And I just briefly wanted to say, too, that while Attorney Slay was here and the TV's running and everything, if you would like to come up and say anything for the public about explaining what it all is that we're, the elevator speech on how we came to this solution, and just mainly for the public to understand better. I know it'll be a big topic next week at Arrowwood, too. I know they'll be very interested.
Well, basically, our new ordinance is very similar. It's basically a cut and paste of the state law, minus one subsection that doesn't apply to the city, which applies to farmland, which we don't have. But it would give our officers a different route for enforcement. I'll give you the process as is now. Currently, if a trespass is being read to a citizen, the trespasser would be given notice and saying, hey, we're gonna arrest you. We're gonna submit a warrant request to the county prosecutor's office. It takes about 3 to 4 months sometimes for that to make its way through the process. And you'll be notified by first-class mail as to when to show up to court. That address that they have is the last known address. It might be 3 to 4 months old. It might be an old address that the Secretary of State has. For those individuals that have housing issues where they're not consistently getting mail at the same place, we lose track of them. They don't get the notice. They don't show up to court. They end up with an order to show cause, which $30 fine assessed. 2 weeks later, they end up with a bench warrant, $60 fee assessed. All of a sudden, they're $90 in the hole. There's a bench warrant out. They then have contact again with the police in some fashion, and they're arrested. They're arrested, and they are arraigned at the next possible court date. But if they're arrested on a Friday, that might be a Monday. And so now they're in jail on a trespass for the weekend, and they show up to court, and this is a charge. You're really not, it's not a jail charge. It says you go to jail either because, and one of our circuit court judges says this best, you go to jail not because we're mad at you, we go to jail because the community is afraid of you. This isn't somebody we're afraid of. So they end up in jail on this charge, and they really don't need to be, and really what they need is our help. And we're not helping anyone at that point. We're just shoving folks in the jail for not an awesome reason. So, at that point, the judge says, well, you've been in jail for this amount of days, 3, 4, 5 days, whatever the case may be. We can close your case with credit for time served, and we can waive the fines and costs, which is appealing for a lot of folks because they don't want to owe the court money, and they accept responsibility, and the case is closed. Sometimes this happens without even the prosecutor being present. This is a kind of a system failure in that regard. So this will give us the opportunity. They'll be issued a code citation, which they give a little green form for all of our civil infractions and our misdemeanors. So that it says right on there that you can go to the 15th District Court, has the address, has the phone number. The officers per policy, when they write a code citation, it says that the end of their tour, so the end of their shift, they turn those in, and that the next day those are turned over to the court. So you can go on the next business day or two and figure out when your court date is. You can show up to the court, you can call, and they'll tell you when to turn yourself in. Or if you can't make it that day, the court can reschedule you for a different day in front of the magistrate, and you can take care of business that way. So we're looking at a few-day turnaround as opposed to several months. And it gives you instructions on how to take care of it yourself. My hope is that if you're have a trespass and you have a need in the community, is that we can get you in. And if your need is, I don't care what it is, Ann Arbor is the place of resources, right? We are here to help people. And if you have a literacy issue, if housing is your issue, substance abuse, mental health, we have an opportunity and an obligation to take care of our citizens. We can work on that. The city is not in the prosecution business to burden folks. We are in the prosecution to lift people up and provide them scaffolding, to work on a diversion program. I'm not interested in making sure that you have a criminal conviction following this. I'm interested to make sure that you can be in the community, abide by the regulations that we have by state law and by our ordinances. You can be a safe member of the community, productive, and at the same time that you are you're safe, that you have what you need to eat and to be housed and to be clothed. That being said, if you're able to do those things, then we can work on our diversion program and have your case dismissed once you've accomplished some of those goals. So we have a street outreach court, we have the mental health court, a sobriety court, veterans court, so finding working with the local defense bar and finding whatever the need is for that particular defendant is something that we're going to be working on a lot more in the future. And this ordinance is a step in the right direction. So thank you for taking the time to read all the emails that have been going back and forth over the last couple of months. And thank you very much to the Human Rights Commission for spending so much time and working on this over the last year.
Councilor Hayner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. All I'd like to add is that, and this already has my support because I've been convinced by the Human Rights Commission folks that this is the best idea, and yourself. So all I'd like to add is that please let us know in 8 months or a year or whatever it is that this is working for us and that we made the right decision here and that we are getting better outcomes from taking this kind of into our own hands, as it were. That's my biggest concern, and to make sure that these changes we make are actually having the outcomes that we want. It seems like it will. I hope that it does, and I'd appreciate some feedback and sometime down the road, let us know what's happening with it.
I'll keep you updated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC 1, an ordinance to encourage Ann Arbor community members to support farm workers' rights and boycott Wendy's and other food service providers not supportive of the Fair Food Program. Moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion of DC 1, Councilmember Nelson.
Hi. Well, there were some interesting bits of news in the last few days that prompted questions to the agenda that were redirected to me, and so I thought I would start with answering that. There were some questions about why this ordinance is pointing a finger at Wendy's. Why are we being particular about Wendy's? I only learned about the Fair Food Program from a Ward 4 constituent who brought it up to me a couple months ago, and I didn't understand the issue at all. I didn't really know anything about it. And what's remarkable really is that these practices, these commitments for better standards for farm workers have been adopted by a lot of really big companies. Walmart has signed on for them, Trader Joe's, McDonald's, Subway, Burger King, and so it is rather remarkable that Wendy's has not. And Wendy's being Wendy's being pointed out specifically in this particular situation really is because University of Michigan is in our backyard, and they previously had a Wendy's in the Michigan Union. And even with the news that was reported on Friday on MLive, it's not entirely clear that a franchisee, not the previous franchisee of Wendy's in the old union, but another franchisee for Wendy's could still apply. We don't know. The process is sort of unknown. And so I'm asking people to support this resolution, A, because I think it's consistent with our values as a community of Ann Arbor, and I think it's consistent with the values that the University of Michigan promotes. And whether or not things behind the scenes are happening with the University of Michigan considering Wendy's or not considering Wendy's, I just think it's the right thing to do to send this message that we support humane work practices, work conditions for farm workers. Yeah, I think that's basically my explanation of this resolution, so I hope that everyone will support it. Thank you.
Councilmember Eaton.
I'd like to add my name as a co-sponsor on this item. I believe that this resolution is fundamentally about social justice. Our country just has a dismal history of treating farm workers horribly. As Speaker Kimberly Daly pointed out during her comments at the beginning of the meeting, the fair food movement is really about social justice for farm workers who are really exploited in this country. We all eat rather cheaply because, in fact, we are unwilling to extend just basic human consideration to the people who pick our food. And for that reason, I believe that we should be speaking out on this kind of topic when we have an opportunity to. And so I'm happy to support this, and I hope others will as well.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum, then Griswold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councilmember Nelson, for responding to some questions I asked about this. One question, though, and since the resolve clause refers to, it asks members of the Ann Arbor community to boycott Wendy's and other food service retailers. And my question was, who are the other food service retailers who've not joined the Fair Food Program? Do you have that information, since we're asking people to boycott these retailers?
I'm wondering, could Kim answer answer that question possibly?
I have no objection.
So
You need to come on. Introduce yourself again, please.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Kim Daly, and I've been doing work with the coalition since I was in college, which was 2011. So the way that the coalition works is that because they are only a group of farm workers, they have to focus on one corporation at a time, and they've been doing this since 2005. And so each of these has been like a one-at-a-time thing. So in terms of food service providers, fast food, they are currently focusing on Wendy's, and then they are also focusing on Kroger and Publix in the grocery store, in grocery stores, but that is, in terms of capacity, the most that they could focus on. And Wendy's is one of the top 5 major fast food companies in the United States, which is why they're focusing on Wendy's specifically right now.
Okay, thank you. So as written, then we're asking people to boycott Kroger's as well, from what you just said, based on what you just said?
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how.
That's a stretch for our community.
Right, yeah. So what I think specifically, it could just be, there's only a boycott that has been called by farm workers for Wendy's specifically. And so it's up to everybody as a consumer to decide if, for Kroger specifically, if they want to not buy from Kroger, but.
Okay, I am concerned, thank you. This resolution asks us to boycott not only Wendy's, but other food service retailers, and you just mentioned that Kroger's falls into that category. Another question, and this would be for staff, the resolution, and I asked this question, but did not get a response, because the cover memo indicates that the resolution quote is being incorporated in the fiscal year budget. I asked, what does that mean? That statement in the cover memo, budget impact, says it has no impact on the current year budget. I knew that, but I was wondering, because it has no impact, what does that statement mean? Mr. Lazarus?
There is no requirement to expend any city resources on this.
Right, so why is it incorporated in the fiscal year 20 budget? That's incongruous.
I think the response was that there's no impact on the 20
Right,
budget.
and that's in here, right, and that's why I asked the question, what does this mean?
I think it probably means there was a mistake when I prepared the draft of the resolution.
So I'm presuming that it's not incorporated in that because it has no.
It's absolutely not in the FY20 budget that you'll be asked to consider.
Okay. Appreciate that clarification.
You're welcome.
And then just another, I asked, and I heard what you said, Councilmember Nelson, about the fact that we're saying U of M, we'd like you to not entertain a bid from Wendy's to open a franchise in the union, but as the Ann Arbor News MLive story indicated that they're not going to be submitting a bid, but as you said, another franchisee could. So hence, I guess your resolve clause to reject any bid from Wendy's. So it's still, I guess, pertinent, is what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's still relevant because the only bit of news that actually was shared in the last few days was that the original franchisee who was previously in the union is not going to be submitting a bid. That's one franchisee. That's not a definitive statement from University of Michigan that they would not accept a bid from any other Wendy's franchisee.
Thanks. I'm wondering if you would entertain deleting other food service retailers, because it's so vague and we don't know who we're telling people to boycott at this point.
To tell you the truth, Councilmember Lum, Mr. Lasfris helped me write this. And so
So who are these other
I'm happy to
retailers, Mr. Lazarus?
to accept an amendment of words that I didn't write, those particular words that I did not write. What if we amended it to remove and other food service retailers? Would that?
Well, it's just that we don't know who they are.
No, I hear what you're saying.
She's
Is what I'm
agreeing.
saying. Yeah, I
You're
agree with you.
removing that?
Is that
I
friendly
would
to the body?
accept, I would accept that as a
support
friendly
that.
amendment.
I'll have that be
Sounds good to
moved by
me.
Nelson, seconded by Lum, friendly to the body, removal of and other food service retailers.
Okay, thanks.
Is that okay, Councilmember?
Mhm.
Thank you. Councilmember Lum, you still have the floor.
Nope, I'm
Councilmember Griswold and Hayner.
Please add me as a co-sponsor.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the change to that. I realize it kind of somewhat neuters the overall idea that we support this process of fair food, unfortunately. It is unusual for me to suggest that consumers boycott things, although we know that that is an action that works. I just wonder, is this something that we've done in the past? Can anybody give me any historic background on this? Have we encouraged boycotts of other businesses in the past as a body? Does anybody know? Okay, I'm just curious, because I was really interested in, I think it was 2014 or so, when they had the tomato, price per pound tomato raise. I don't know if that was a fair food program, but that was, yeah, I was really interested in that one. That was Yum Brands, which was like Taco Bell and some other ones. And I don't know if folks know that, but they said they're going to pay $1 more a pound, which basically went from 45 cents, I think it was, to 75 cents for a 32-pound bucket, which is the standard weight out when they were lifted in these fields, when they're hand harvesting tomatoes. And so you're talking about 40 to 50 bucks a day these people are making to put food on our table. So broadly, I support the goals of this fair food program. So it's friendly that we remove that and focus on Wendy's, but, you know, will we be coming back in the future and saying now this retailer or that retailer? I can't speak to that, but I mean, I'm going to support this because I broadly support the goals of the Fair Food Network, and they did a good job with the tomatoes. I mean, it really, that is a life, even the 1 cent per pound is quite a difference. It made quite a difference to these folks' lives. You're talking about somebody's making $13,000 a year for putting food on our table, really, it's incredible that it's undervalued. So, yeah, I'm going to pass on co-sponsoring, but I definitely support it.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
So I'll probably be the outlier here. I mean, I'm going to support this, but I just want to note that it's not clear to me that there's a direct local connection here, because it's unclear whether any Wendy's franchisee is going to bid on the Michigan Union business. And for me, resolutions like this, there needs to be a direct local connection. Otherwise, it becomes more of a, you know, political message and statement, with all due respect to the sponsors. And I do recognize that virtually all, you know, political positions have a local impact in some way. And we have another resolution later on the Clean Water Act and rules that demonstrates what I'm talking about. That resolution is similar in that it advocates a position, but it's different in that there is a local connection. Depending on what the EPA does, there could be changes in the protections of our local streams and wetlands. So I know this isn't a big deal, and I recognize this started out with a local connection, but I just think in the future, you know, I don't know. I like to focus on, you know, when we make position statements like this, that there is a local connection, a discernible one, an obvious one, and because otherwise I do think it becomes more of a, you know, political message and statement, again, with all due respect to the sponsors.
Further discussion? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Nelson bringing this forward. I know it was hoping to get this in front of the Human Rights Commission, and they've been fairly busy between the Trespass and the Police Commission in short order, but it was something that they were definitely interested in. I learned before this meeting that we would be the first city to support a boycott of Wendy's, and I actually, with all due respect to my colleague, am happy to take that kind of political position. I also am representative to the Greenbelt, and we're trying to support local agriculture in our community, and one of the reasons why we do that is so that we can have fair practices and support sustainable practices in our own backyards. So I do see the local connection. When the new union opens up, there'll be thousands of people, visitors, residents that will pass through that space on a very regular basis. So I do think it's important, and I appreciate this coming forward, and I'm very pleased to support it.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. I want to drive to the end. Does anyone mind? We're on a roll. DC2, resolution accepting annual renewal recommendations of the Council Liquor License Review Committee and setting hearings for non-renewal liquor licenses. Moved by Councilor Lum, second by Councilor Hayner. Discussion of DC2. Councilor Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This resolution comes from the Council Liquor License Review Committee and relates to the annual renewal of liquor licenses in the city. City staff and the community have completed the annual review process and are recommending renewal of licenses for everyone except Ashley's Restaurant and Banfield Bar and Grill, two establishments with outstanding personal property taxes that are due the city. The resolution also sets a hearing date, March 6th at 10 a.m. on the matter of the non-renewals of the two licenses and appoints me as hearing officer. If the bills are paid in full by then, and hopefully they are, the recommendations for non-renewals of the licenses will be, reversed. The review committee recommends your approval, and I'd like to thank all the members, Councilmember Romlawi, Hayner, and Griswold, for their attendance at and contributions to the discussion, the annual reviews. And we had a lively discussion at our last meeting last Friday, and I think a lot of valuable, and many staff were on hand. I'd like to thank City Clerk Boudry and, the Police Department is represented by Lieutenant Abley, very ably represented by Lieutenant Bush, City Attorney's Office, Treasurer's Office, the Building Department, and the Fire Department. All of these departments review over 150 licensed establishments that have liquor licenses in the city. So there's really a lot of work that goes into this review, and it's very worthwhile, and it's labor intensive, but it's great housekeeping, and we, are able to confirm that we don't have problem establishments, and that people's taxes are paid up in full, that there are no outstanding building or, fire department concerns or other, legal issues. And so, again, I'd like to just thank everyone for their contributions to the discussion and all of staff support that goes into this each year. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilmember Romlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I just want to also thank Councilmember Lum for doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us. She's the chair of quite a few commissions, and that's one of them. And we had a great meeting on Friday, just echoing a lot of the same sentiments and the efforts made by the police department in reviewing all the instances and, going through all the data and making sure that our community is as safe as it can be, and the educational outreach programs that they're involved in to try to curb underage drinking and excessive drinking. And, we have a very proactive police force and other departments in the city, and I think the residents should be proud of that, and they are doing a lot of work that people just don't see on the surface. So, I do appreciate that.
Further discussion? Councilor Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, I agree with the previous statements, and that's a great, I'm loving that committee. It's great. There's a real intersection of all the different kinds of, the staff and the functions of the city are kind of revealed by that. We have about 150 liquor licenses here in the city, and so I'm just interested in using this as an analogy for when we talk about other recreational drug use in the city, like a marijuana. It's just going to be interesting to see how if there are analogous pathways towards, allowing these uses in our city. And so I'm looking forward to serving on this committee, and thank you for your support of bringing these small hearings forward. And it's been my understanding that historically these are few and far between, because people, the truth is that owning a liquor license is a moneymaker here in town if you run your business properly. And people don't want to give that up, and so they don't. And, it's just the idea that we are so proactive. I was so excited to speak with Lieutenant Bush and understand all the different programs that we do, reaching out for community outreach for issues around recreational use of alcohol. And we need to keep it up, and this helps support that. So thank you, and thank you for your support on this.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It is approved. DC3, resolution to encourage transportation collaboration, moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of DC3. Councilmember Griswold.
The reason I brought this forward is I think that it is critical that we collaborate with our community partners, not only for information sharing, but also for cost sharing. And it's not just a matter of saving dollars, it's a matter of being able to use those dollars to improve crosswalks. So I don't see it as just a dollar. I see it as better illumination, better markings, better signage, and that is critical. The other thing that I found is that as a council member, I have talked to some of the University of Michigan leadership, and I did not encounter any resistance to cost sharing and collaborating on the Lower Town project. The University of Michigan is very interested in that, and the traffic impact has included growth of the University of Michigan, student body, staff, the University Medical Campus. There is one parking structure there now that the university is built, and there is a second one that's being planned. Another issue, and I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but Councilmember Bannister did, is the development down on the DTE Broadway Park. And so there is some interest for collaborating there. So I hope before staff brings back the contract for Lower Town, that we take advantage of some of our neighbors and try to reduce that cost. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
So I've asked the clerk to circulate an amendment to this resolution. And basically, I would like to replace the single resolve clause in the resolution with two resolve clauses that I think more clearly state the intent of the resolution. And I'll read the amendment. Resolved that prior to approving a transportation-related request for proposal or contract, city staff will collaborate with and explore cost-sharing opportunities with the city's community partners, including but not limited to the University of Michigan, Washtenaw County Road Commission, Michigan Department of Transportation, Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, and SEMCOG. Resolved that the city will seek opportunities for working with experts from the University of Michigan or other appropriate local colleges and universities.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Bannister. Councilmember Eaton, you still have the floor.
It's not to change this resolution, but just to more clearly give direction as to what we intend to accomplish with this resolution. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Lazarus?
I just want to reassure members of council that we do that on every opportunity. We have an exceptional partner agreement with the university, not only with Tree, but with their whole collaboratorium, I think is what they call it. So I think we do that. Staff meets with the university staff frequently to address and align all of the improvement projects, both on the university's part and on the city's part. So I certainly appreciate the encouragement and direction from council, but I do want to assure you that occurs now on a routine basis as well.
Councilmember Hayner on the amendment.
I'm going to pass on that one, thank you.
Councilmember Bannister on the amendment.
Nope, sorry.
Is the amendment friendly to the body? Amendment's friendly. Councilmember Hayner, you're back in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say I support this. Anything that calls for supporting innovative solutions and partnerships has my support, and as our city administrator just pointed out, we actually do that, and so by making this a formal request to do so and make sure that we continue to do so, I think can only have good results. So I'm definitely supportive of this. Thank you.
Bannister, then Grant.
I want to thank Councilmember Griswold for bringing this forward, and I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. And I just wanted to echo Councilmember Griswold's suggestions. As I reread some of the city U of M meeting minutes from 2018, I saw that they did talk about the Lower Town Mobility Study, and I would just encourage staff through Mr. Lazarus to go back before that Lower Town Mobility Study comes back to really talk specifically about Tree and U of M's interest in that study, and whether in kind or cash, whether they would be willing to partner more with us on that. Thank you.
Councilmember, I'm sorry, Mr. Lazarus.
So after Ms. Griswold provided this, I did call over and reemphasize with their government relations team that there is support from other places in the university to participate in a meaningful way. And we'll continue to pursue that.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand operationally what changes if this passes. I know we strive for collaboration. When a project comes forward, will we get a report on what kind of outreach was done? What changes as a result of this? I'm not against collaboration in any way, shape, or form. I'm struggling to understand how this is different than our current practice.
I think there have been a lot of requests from council over the last couple of months to provide a little bit more detail on contract resolutions that come back before council. And I think this is one area where we can state somewhere in the accompanying resolution the efforts that were done to be collaborative. There's a lot of cost sharing with the university when they have significant frontage along a road project, and that's generally shown in the funding sources for the contracts as well. So I think it's really clarity as to what actions we took as we bring capital improvement projects and other contracts back to council for its consideration.
Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold and Lum.
Yeah, while I brought this resolution forward, I want to acknowledge that there is a tremendous amount of collaboration. I was informed tonight that MDOT is planning to upgrade the crosswalk on Huron near Thayer, and I don't even have the information on that. Sometimes things are happening so quickly that we don't have a chance to collaborate as well as we should. And collaborate, I mean between council and staff. Another example is illumination. I was contacted by the University of Michigan, and a meeting is scheduled to talk about improved illumination in the near campus area, and especially the area just the border of the campus, and I expect to share that information with Mr. Lazarus tomorrow.
Councilmember, I will certainly take the concern that we move too fast at any time.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
Could you add me as a co-sponsor, please?
Councilmember Lum, my apologies.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm obviously supporting this. Would also like to have my name as a sponsor. I appreciate that Councilmember Griswold brought this forward, and I like the amendment that Councilmember Eaton made. And I do think there's a there's so many opportunities for enhanced collaboration with the U. As you stated, Mr. Lazarus, the road network encircles, obviously, our neighborhoods and the university campus. And the incident that occurred on Huron a few weeks back, the response to that from, I know Councilmember Griswold and I heard from many Ward 2 folks who, and we did as well here at the council meeting, knew the individuals involved, and it's an area that in our ward you travel quite regularly, and and it's an area that is obviously where I'd say the vast majority of the pedestrians happen to be university students. And so the obvious need to make these areas more safe for, and there's so many things that can be done in terms of the needed lighting on Huron, for example, and other just crosswalk improvements in general. I think, it goes without saying that we need to partner on these endeavors. And for example, on Huron, the university's going to be they're going to be rebuilding the CCRB at the corner of, which is at the corner of I drive by there every day, multiple times a day. It's at Observatory North U / Huron / Washtenaw, and I can't tell you, multiple times a day, you see students crossing the street there, bicyclists, et cetera, and I've personally witnessed a lot of near misses, and so there's a capital project that the university is going to be doing, and I think we talk to each other and collaborate on ways to improve safety at that intersection, at those, in and around on those roads, Washtenaw, Huron, Northview. That'll be of great benefit to the community. And so I know that you said when the city brings capital improvement projects forward, but, and I'm sure you intended this as well, when the university brings capital improvement projects forward, that this just needs to be, and it probably is, but whatever we can do to make that part of those conversations more robust in terms of how can we, share in the expense, the cost to make the needed improvements. I think that would be beneficial for all concerned. I know I'm stating the obvious, but again, I'm glad you brought this forward. Councilmember Griswold.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB1, resolution to approve the Payne annexation, .48 acres, 245 Orchard Hills Drive, moved by... Thank you. Councilmember Lum, second by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion, please, at DB1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. DB2, resolution to strengthen nuclear emergency planning for the population of the city of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Bannister. Discussion, please, of DB2. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. We heard from a couple of speakers earlier this evening who came to the Environmental Commission in, was that December? Gave us a presentation on potassium iodide and the different regulations that Canada uses within, as the speakers mentioned, that these are stockpiled within 10 miles of Fermi and not outside of that in the United States. Yet we are within that 50-mile event radius. The resolution before you directs the city to exert its influence to work with the county to ask for leadership to require these things to be stockpiled to assist us in this. As in Canada, my hope is that the Canadian system, the energy provider pays this cost. My hope is that we could work with our federal delegation to have that similar legislation adopted here. This is obviously a far-reaching thing. I think it's not on a lot of people's minds, but given the events of Japan of just a few years ago, I think it's worth discussing and worth bringing into our local emergency management planning.
Further discussion? Councilmember Bannister.
And just to build on that, I would like to thank the Environmental Commission and John Mursky, and also Dr. Missy Stoltz, who leaped on this opportunity to bring this resolution forward for us. And these pills, these KI potassium iodine pills, are actually about somewhere between 25 cents and $1 each. So we could stockpile enough. And how it works is that they would be held at like schools, hospitals, clinics, post offices, police and fire stations for distribution by local public health officials if Fermi 2 in particular had a accident and we needed to ingest these. And as the Thyroid Association, the American Thyroid Association said, this is dramatically protects us in the case of from thyroid cancer in the event of we were exposed to radioactive iodine. And so I hope you all will support it, and we can answer any questions.
Further discussion? Councilmember Nelson, then Member Umlawi.
My only question is, so we stockpile these pills, do they have a shelf life? Are these something that we're gonna have to keep current?
I believe, and we could, Dr. Stoltz is here, I believe it was 5 to 7 years for the pills.
Yes, that was an answer to it.
Yes. And they're very inexpensive. Thank you. Thus far.
Councilmember Umlawi.
I would like to be added as a co-sponsor to this. I think this is a very forward-thinking resolution that's being brought forward. I appreciate the efforts made by the commission to bring it to council. Aside from Fermi 2, we have, you know, a president right now that's withdrawing from the nuclear treaties with Russia. We're entering a new arms race possibly with nuclear weapons for the cost of less than $1 per person. I think this is a sound investment, something that ought to be pursued and looked at seriously. And because of our current conditions and the threats that are posed, and the cost of an event is astronomical, I feel this is a very wise and prudent measure to take.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. DB3, resolution to support a strong Clean Water Act and strong clean water rule, moved by Councilmember Bannister, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of DB3.
Yes, we did.
Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, the Environmental Commission is busy. This is a second, and Dr. Stoltz is busy. This was a second one coming out of the commission. Originally, it was brought to our attention by Jason Frenzel, Ward 1 resident, and Meredith Gillies from the Clean Water Action Network. They suggested it to us, and we ran with it, and here it is. What it does is, in ours, it directs the city of Ann Arbor to, particularly Mr. Lazarus, to notify Congresswoman Dingell and Senator Peters and Senator Stabenow that we support a broader definition of waters of the United States than what has been rolled back recently by the EPA, to include the streams and wetlands that feed into the quality and quantity of water in larger bodies of water downstream. So it was originally started in 1972 and re-strengthened in 2015, but then recently it has been weakened and threatened, and so that is why we are urging the city of Ann Arbor to stand up for our streams and wetlands so that they would not lose protection under the proposed rollback of these federal regulations.
Further discussion? Councilmember Smith.
Would you please add me as a co-sponsor of this?
Councilmember Hayner.
I would also like to be a co-sponsor. Any situation we have to encourage our state and federal representatives to do what they can to give us local control and better protection over our waters is critical to this body. I would say the number one question that constituents have for me right now are water issues. And since our system is predicated on the collection of surface waters, this is even more critical for us. I appreciate what the Environmental Commission bringing this forward, and also the Office of Sustainability as we look at any issues with our local environment that are reflected in our climate action plan and our water service plans. I think it's critical to lean into those above us to do the best they can, because it literally trickles down. And so this is an important one. I encourage everyone to support it. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ramlawi, then Eaton.
Just like to be added as a co-sponsor as well, and just echo the sentiments that have been made. We need to apply pressure going up the food chain in order to protect the welfare of our citizens.
Councilmember Eaton.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor as well, please.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. Just briefly, I'd also let residents and the rest of this body know that our policy agenda committee has set this very idea that this is part of our ongoing policy as a body to encourage those who serve us in a greater capacity to give us the latitude we need in dealing with our own local environmental issues.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. Do we have communications today from our city attorney?
No, Mayor.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Grand, seconded by Councilmember Ramlawi. Discussion of the clerk's report. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Yes.
Please.
Hi, Tim Hall here. I wanted to talk about development in Ann Arbor, which has been a big issue in recent months with the debate over the library lot. I was not in favor of Proposal A. For me, the library lot being across the street from the transit center seemed ideal for high-density development. However, it did pass, and as such, the development is off the table. Despite this, the library lot is not the be-all, end-all of development in Ann Arbor. Currently, we have a large amount of land that is severely underdeveloped. As it stands, there are many single-family neighborhoods on the edge of campus and downtown occupied predominantly by students. Also, there are several thoroughfares with major transit lines, such as Washtenaw, that contain low-density development for large segments. These areas could accommodate far more housing than they currently do, and to take pressure off of downtown to accommodate new multifamily housing. Housing outside of downtown would also be less costly than in prime downtown locations, and the city could use some of the new tax revenue to help fund affordable housing, perhaps utilizing city-owned land. Furthermore, by upzoning such areas for mixed use and densities, we can expand the area in which it is viable to do without a car. This would decrease the overall cost of living by making the cost of a car, insurance, and gasoline less necessary. We could also eliminate parking minimums, increase the number of units that could be built on these developments, and lowering costs. The increased demand in these areas would also help support more transit service, which would benefit old residents as well as new, and would help mitigate the impact on traffic. Some would say the cost of housing is going up because of luxury developments. That makes no sense. People aren't moving here because of luxury developments. They're moving here for jobs and to study. Also, housing in prime downtown locations is going to be expensive, and as it stands, those are the only areas where it is easy to build. The cost of housing is going up because we aren't building enough to satisfy the demand, and that is largely due to existing zoning and other impediments to development. By allowing more housing where it makes sense, we can be better equipped to meet the demand provide more units at lower cost.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? It's protocol just to mosey on up when it's free.
This might be the first time I've disagreed on an issue where all of you will disagree with me. It happens to do with Wendy's. From my limited understanding of it, from my understanding, Florida was like the #1 state that had Wendy's. And then they wanted to get tomatoes from another state or from other states and from Mexico and not from Florida. And as a result, one interpretation of this is that it was political retaliation that's happened to them. And the way I kind of think about Wendy's is that the question was asked that, have you ever done this before? Yeah, actually, City Council, they want to divest from energy companies. And, you know, if you really mean what you say tonight, then I expect to see a resolution later on that says, hey, you know, we need to divest from Wendy's. And I strongly disagree with that notion, that I don't think City Council should be in the process of boycotting anyone or divesting from anyone, that I actually don't think that's appropriate. I understand you're doing it for political reasons. I could understand even my opinion now is not very politically right. That's why I'd never probably run for council, is because this would come back to haunt me. But anyway, I disagree strongly with you on that point. I just wanted to, you guys got my point, what I was trying to say earlier, but the basic idea is that I think you should work with MDOT and with the University of Michigan at that location and put something in place, because the way that it's going right now and the process that's being followed with that that railway area, it's just not right. And I think things could be a lot better. But yeah, this is the one time I appreciated Councilmember Lum's comments on that. You know, if you voted the other way, I would have been totally in favor of it. But you know, I just don't think you should be boycotting Ohio. As much as I hate Ohio State, Wendy's is from Ohio, and they are our neighbors. And I'm not a huge fan of boycotting something that's close to us. And you know, they are. You know, I don't know how much they must be in Michigan. They help businesses here. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. David Schoenberger here again. Supplemental to my comments earlier, I am glad, very glad, that the City Council voted to pass the Nuclear Emergency Planning Resolution on today's agenda. The specific action of this resolution is to advocate for state and federal responsibility to protect Ann Arbor residents regarding an issue which falls under state and federal jurisdiction. To be clear, this resolution passed today intentionally does not call for the city to purchase supplies of potassium iodide tablets. Therefore, the financial implications and logistical costs to the city should be relatively small, given that the goal is to seek accountability at a higher level of government. To reiterate, perhaps at some later date, if those powers that be at the federal and state levels fail to hear the voice of the people, the city may want to come back and take another look at this issue with an eye toward greater self-reliance, perhaps in a strategic partnership with the county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, Mayor and Council. My name is Luis Vasquez. I'm a resident of the First Ward here in Ann Arbor. I have, in the interest of transparency, I have a few questions for some of the council members. Councilmember Hayner, it may just be a coincidence, but I saw Tom Weeder walking in our neighborhood yesterday, and I'm just wondering, did you have a meeting with him? You don't have to answer now. Also, during the January 7th council meeting, Tom Stolberg sent you at least one text, maybe more, trying to either correct or clarify some point that he was trying to influence you on. And my question about that is, how many texts do any of the council members receive during council meetings? And from whom? The reason I ask this, and I know this is America, and you can associate with whomever you want, and people can walk anywhere around this town, wherever they want. But the reason I ask is because both of these men are litigants suing the city. Attorney Weeder has now cost the city and its taxpayers upwards of $1 million. And Mr. Stolberg has a GoFundMe going to file a lawsuit on the Lower Town zoning. So I would ask, are you, Mr. Hayner and Ms. Bannister, are you in support of this upcoming lawsuit? And are you and maybe any of the other council members one of the 15 anonymous donors to Mr. Stolberg's GoFundMe? What I'm really concerned about are any back channel communications that could undermine how council operates, and of course any potential conflicts of interest. And I would dare say that I don't think anybody elected any of you to sue the city and rule by trying to rule by litigation in this city is wrong. Now, I wanted to point everybody towards this article. You know, this is one person who has, I think, an undue amount of influence over certain council members. And once again, you know, I mean, this is America. You know, we can trade freely, but I would want to know, were you subject to the same kind of vetting that Ron Jr. was subjected to?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Hi, everyone. My name is David Silkworth, and I just wanted to make a comment about the water rates issue. I wanted to add in that, you know, a lot of people are passing along misinformation. A lot of you might not know that there are a lot of folks who live in multifamily rental properties who actually have seen absolutely no returns to them, or reductions in their rents, or in reduction in water rate fees after the resolution was passed. So I would really, really appreciate it if the city would look into all of the landlords and find out who's doing this, how much are they refunding, were there, I mean, it just seems to me that if we've given them a break, they should give the renters a break. And I'd also like to say, as a person who just loves our neighborhoods, I know some folks who, you know, last year we had the gypsy moth issue. And, you know, when trees lose that many leaves, they're in duress, and one of the things that folks recommend is that you water them heavily. You know, and so the timing last year really, really was very, very unfortunate for a lot of folks because they wanted to preserve the beauty and the reason I think we all live in Ann Arbor, which is our trees, you know, and our neighborhoods, and you know, and they had to do that at an increased and unfair, I believe, cost. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Amlawi.
I forgot to mention a thanks to Ariana Slay for her work on the trespass ordinance, and I didn't see her sitting over here when I commented on it. So I just wanted to make sure I did that here before I left. And to respond to a public, you know, I think the name was Luis, if I was correct. To be honest, yeah, I was vetted. I ran 2 campaigns. I was vetted up, down, left, right, and I won a seat. And I urge you to explore in any way, form, or fashion. Everything is FOIA-able. You can FOIA people's emails, text messages, etc. I think we have a body here that is full of integrity, and I don't think it helps govern and form policy when accusations are made that have no substance. So I don't like to respond to people one-on-one, but I feel my integrity is under attack, and I'm not going to stand for it. And I was vetted, and in fact, I received more votes than any other council member here, and I'm proud of that. And that's all I have to say.
Councilmember Griswold?
Three quick things. First, I'd like to thank Kai Patainen for taking photos of crosswalks. I asked him to take 3 photos of excellent crosswalks, and he actually, along the way, found some that he had problems with, and so he sent me those photos, and I'm going to make them public in the near future. Also, a shout out to food gatherers. I participated yesterday in boxing up food with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and a number of members from the County Commission. And lastly, I'm going to ask Representative Ronnie Peterson to introduce or reintroduce the bill that he introduced last year to get the process started for language for a state crosswalk law. And while that will simply be the Uniform Traffic Code, which is not what we support in Ann Arbor, it will get the process started. It'll have bipartisan support. It will get to committee, and there we can influence the actual language. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things real quick. Tonight I'm wearing my first FRC robotics pin. This is this year's challenge, the FRC challenge. And I encourage everybody to go to firstinspires.org to learn more about the FIRST Robotics program. I was a mentor for 4 years at community high school. My son was there, and I'm sort of at arm's length mentoring this year, and I'm still signed up to support them. And it's a great program for our kids, for our high school kids, and they actually go much younger than that. And so if anybody has the time, I know we have a city that's full of engineers and folks that are interested in the sciences and progressive learning environments, and FRC certainly provides one. It's a great thing, and I encourage people to look into it. Number 2 is I've had some constituents ask me about our border-to-border trail, and I know with the budget coming up, there's a section of the border-to-border trail that basically runs from the Burns-Stokes Preserve into the city through the Barton Nature areas, and it's the missing link. It's the last bit of the border-to-border trail. So when we talk about collaboration in the community on mobility issues, I think this is one that I'm going to be bringing back on the radar and see if we can scrape up a few funds. The nonprofits that are working on that trail there's about $7 million in trail work left, and they've come up with about 6.5 of it. And so we're in for a little bit, and I hope to get that on the agenda with parks and in the budget cycle this year. Lastly, I would follow Mr. Romali in saying that I typically don't respond to council comments. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But it's absurd to suggest that I'm receiving some kind of tips here at the table. I am 100% no phone user here at the table. I put my phone away, I turn it off. No one's texting me, no one's influencing me by emails. And any emails that are answered are available as a part of the public record during this. And any of my email you're welcome to do a FOIA to see what people are saying to me. And the idea that, yes, we do, you point out rightly so, that we do have freedom of association. And but the idea that someone walks in our neighborhood and they're heading to my house is, I don't even know what to say about that. It's quite outrageous. And keen observers of the council vote will know that I actually voted against releasing Councilmember Bannister and Simicala Sapathy, former councilwoman, from the lawsuit. And so I have no interest in conspiring with anyone about city business other than representing my residents in a way and representing their concerns in a way that is neutral and to their best benefit. And so I reject the idea that I'm taking hot tips from people by email or by phone during a meeting, because I absolutely do not do that. That's quite an interesting comment, and it's quite interesting to suggest that you know what's going on with my texts. I actually didn't even have a phone at the last 2 council meetings because it was crushed on a job site, and my fellow members here will know how I've been pleading for them to share contacts with me because all my contacts were destroyed. And so I have a new phone that I don't use at council meetings. Anyone else is free to reach out to me, and if you Speaking of that, if you did have me in your phone, feel free to text me your contact and share that with me, because I lost about 2,500 contacts when my phone was crushed. And so I would appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Do we have a closed session today?
Yes, Mayor, we do. We're going into closed session under the Open Meetings Act under pending litigation. And if the clerk could recognize that this is for the Peters Building Company versus the City of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County case. Thank you.
Moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Eaton.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson? Yes. Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Long?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Motion carries.
We are in closed session. please to go back into open session. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Amlawi. Discussion? No discussion. With 6 council members present. Do we need 8 to get back into open session?
Jane, tell those people to come on out.
Hey, we gotta,
Come on, guys. Take it to the Heidelberg
5,
later.
6, 7. All in favor of moving back?
Aye.
All opposed? We are back in open session. May I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember Smith, second by Councilmember Malawi. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.